Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
I'm your host, Con John Turk, and on this episode of the Blind Apex Podcast, we're going to talk about my biggest weakness, braking. Joining me, returning guests, hopefully well-rested from the Daytona 24-hour, GLTC champ, driving coach extraordinaire, TOMO Gorman. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hello. Good to be back.
You're not wearing your signature blue sunglasses. I don't know what to think about this. I realize it is
I'm out of
nighttime.
uniform.
Yeah, right? You're not in uniform.
Yeah.
So, what have you been up to since we last recorded? I think we recorded in November, December time frame. So,
Yeah. I mean, other than holidays, I guess January was really busy. It was really fun. We ended up going to, I went down to Barber Motorsports Park for a track day with Just Track It. They put on some great track day events down in the Southeast mostly.
Okay.
And then the following weekend, I got to go to Daytona for 2 weeks. And the first weekend was the Roar. The second weekend was a race. And I got to race in TCR again with Rockwell Autosport down there at Daytona. And then right after that, I went somewhere else too. And I'm spacing out on where I went to. But yeah, it was like basically every weekend in January was, and then we raced the World Racing League event at Eagles Canyon. That was it. So it was like 4 weekends back to back to back. And I've had the last couple off. So it's been, yes, I am rested.
Yeah. Most of my friends who were at Daytona 24-hour were not driving, and they needed more rest than I think the drivers did.
Yeah.
But
that's the thing. They keep you around the clock. It's loud the entire time. You just kind of lose track of days and everything in there.
yeah. And they're always there to have a good time, right? So they don't have any responsibilities, and they spend their time not being very responsible. So
Right. That's the nice part about our race being Friday, because I was a support race for the 4-hour Michelin Pilot Challenge races. We get Saturday and Sunday off too, so we can go partake in a little bit of both.
Yeah. I need to find somebody to get on because I know this was the first year there was no GRM experience, and I've never been, and I was counting on the GRM experience, so I got to find a new way to really do it up, sort of the way this grassroots motorsports lifestyle does it. So,
Sure. Yeah, they still did some crowd stuff, but they didn't have their big corral anymore.
right. So, well, awesome. I really appreciate you coming on the show because we're about to kick off the 2024 season here in the Mid-Atlantic region. And I wanted to talk about braking, one, because it's my biggest weakness, and this is a 100% selfish podcast, but also I get a lot of questions about it. So, and it's hard, right? So I think a lot of people start looking at their data and they always see like big chunks of time maybe that they can see in the biggest braking zones, like basically the turn ones of most tracks in the world. But I think they miss some of the other types of braking zones that can cost them just as much time. And that's, for this show's purpose, when you have to scrub going into turn 10 at VIR into South Bend, if you scrub 2 miles an hour too much, that's a detriment, and you're carrying that down the hill into where you should be carrying a lot of momentum into Oak Tree, and then obviously Oak Tree down the back straightaway. So let's talk a little bit about how you evaluate a track, specifically in the braking zones, and how you break those down.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty firm believer, and it seems to be relatively agreed upon, that the thing that separates the good drivers from the great drivers is braking. And a lot of that more has to do with brake release than brake application. But to me, there's kind of, I put it in terms of 3 different styles of braking. There's, hard braking, medium braking, and soft braking, if you want to just put it simply. But hard braking is obviously threshold braking. You're stopping at the absolute maximum adhesion that the tires can give you. You're generally traveling from a high rate of speed to a lower rate of speed, call it 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, depending on the car. And you're obviously, the main goal with that is make the car stop as fast as possible, get the car slowed down for a tighter corner. The softest braking is the exact opposite, something like South Bend at VIR, turn 1 at Mid-Ohio. Those types of corners where the brake is really just a speed adjustment and a directional change, more so than it is actually getting the car slowed down. So it's helping you accomplish what a lift would do just a little quicker. And then in the middle, you kind of have to say there's something in the middle. And that's maybe you're scrubbing 20, 30 miles an hour, not 10, not 60, but you don't need nearly as much brake pressure. You're not on them nearly as long, but that does tend to look a lot closer to that first style where you're hard on the brakes for a long period of time and then eventually coming off of them. So when I verbalize it to others, I always think of it in terms of there's 3 different: hard, medium, soft.
Okay. You brought up the interesting point. I hear it come from a lot of people, and that's the time of brake application and the time of brake release. And I think there's a technique to all of that, right? Some of us jump on the brakes real hard, irregardless of what brake pad compounds you have, the size of your brakes, those types of things. There's a sort of like a finesse to jumping on the brakes. And I've been scarred. One, because my comp school time, I think we were doing the mock races for NASA Mid-Atlantic, and either way, my day of comp school, I flat spotted going into turn 1 3 times, and I literally was out of tires.
Ooh.
And each time at VIR, going into turn 1, going all the way to the right, there is no traction over there. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist like it does in the Rubberden area. So you can't go that deep, that hard. And I just jump on them. I'm very hard on the initial braking. And I've had to sort of ease myself out of that because I've destroyed a lot of tires doing that. And I'm just trying to learn how to be. Well, obviously, one of my problems is getting on the brake well. And then once I started getting used to that, I started realizing there was a lot of time in when I let go of the brakes, when I come off the brakes, and I started rolling in a little faster. That gave me a lot more time. But it doesn't work in every corner. So you always have to evaluate each corner. Which one's going to be the hard brake on, and then which one do you carry in? I personally don't tend to trail brake a whole lot. It sort of intimidates me as a technique, but then I find myself doing it all the time. When I come off the back straightaway at VIR, I'm on them all the time. We're braking super late on the back straight. We're turning left and then right while still on the brakes, So I do it, but I can't do it in some of these corners, like turn 1 at VIR. I just won't find myself trail braking there.
Sure. I'm glad you brought up that term, because that term to me is so taboo. When you're taught in that very structured clinical kind of classroom style of instructing, there's braking in a straight line. You brake in a straight line, and when you want to turn, you come off the brakes. And then when you get really good, then you can maybe try trail braking, which means you're turning and braking at the same time. And to me, that is so unfair to teach somebody that that's how it's segmented out, because that's not how it works. If you're braking hard, you're going from 140 to 60 miles an hour. Yeah, you're braking probably at most tracks in a straight line for a majority of that. But in my opinion, all good braking combines braking and turning when you have to start turning the car. It's a blend between your maximum braking, or you call it braking in a straight line. As you start to turn the wheel, you're blending the brake pedal away and you're adding steering angle into the car. So in the term of trail braking being turning and braking at the same time, all good braking is trail braking, because you're always blending a little bit of your braking into the corner while you're starting to turn the wheel. I'll maybe give somebody that the term trail braking is legitimate for a corner. Like, it's my home track. So I always think of it first. Mid-Ohio Carousel, where you're just kind of like never actually going straight. There's no chance to go straight.
Right.
VIR Hog Pen or Roller Coaster is a pretty good example. Plug in your own here, but those are not trail braking because of the way you need to be braking. They're trail braking because of the layout of the track.
Okay.
In that sense, like you have to be turning. So I try to brake, or I try not to bring up the term trail braking, and I try to break someone's thinking of that really quickly, because I'll say it a third time, all good braking is trail braking, or all trail braking. All corners require some level of trail braking in that they blend into the corner. I'm curious, were you flat spotting right fronts or right rears, or what were you flat spotting VIR turn one?
Right fronts.
Right fronts?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a unique problem with the lack of ABS, which I think we'll get to, but
well, I don't have that problem anymore, but yeah.
No? Okay, that's good. That's good. I'll take ABS every time I can.
Okay.
Give me the option.
Yeah. Okay, so that was excuse me, I did my comp school in a 2000 EM1 front wheel drive Civic with a B18 C5 Honda Challenge H2. Once that car died, I went to a 2007 Civic, like DJ drive, so 8th gen. And one of the big things was, how do I traction control this car without screwing up the ABS system? So we went through that that process. And it's a godsend to me, because I don't try to ride the ABS, but there are some times fatigue sets in 45 minutes into a race or whatever, last lap, and you lean on it a little bit, and it's there, and you're not destroying tires that are getting pretty expensive these days. So,
yeah. I mean, I tend to, going with the idea of, hard, medium, and soft style corners, I would say that it's mainly to do with how much speed you're dissipating or how long you're on the brakes. So naturally, if you're on the brakes trying to get rid of 50 to 70 miles an hour, that's probably a hard brake zone. Versus if you're trying to get rid of 5 to 20 miles an hour, that's probably a really soft brake zone. Each one has its own sort of general rules to it that I kind of take into account for. So any sort of threshold braking, you're braking as hard as you can for a sustained period of time to get rid of a lot of speed. Really, across all three, you want to hit peak pressure right away. You want to use that first moment that you're on the brakes to use the chance to upset the car, or take the opportunity of what's going to upset the car to happen right away at its most efficient moment, and then give the car as much time as possible to recompose itself through that entire braking zone. So in turn one, VIR, we'll use as an example, you're going to jump on the brakes. You want to hit that peak pedal pressure on the brake pedal as quickly as possible, including how quickly can you get your leg off the throttle onto the brake. That's something I find a lot of people struggle with. They're hitting the brake hard enough when they get to it, but they're so slow to get from the throttle to the brake. It's like, you need to get over there.
Yeah. I actually found that some of my issue was that I was trying to move so fast that I was just slamming my foot on the brake. So I had to be quick but methodical about it, and not just hard reactions, like I'm at my marker, slam, So,
yep. Yeah, that's to go on the ABS topic for a second. When you don't have that safety net, you want to hit the limit of adhesion as quickly as possible without overdoing it. Mm-hmm. With ABS, you can overdo it. I always tell people, if you have ABS, you should be using it for the first moment you're on the brake pedal. Whether that's actually good or not, like that's my way to tell people how hard to brake. You should feel the ABS tickle under your toes for just a moment.
Okay.
And then it should go away pretty quickly, because that's going to be your indication that the tire is at its absolute grip level on the brakes. If you don't have that ABS, the alternative is locking up. So you should essentially be working on dialing in how much brake pressure can I be using per corner, per track, your car is basically the same every time, but you take it to a different corner, a different track. You have to dial in a muscle memory of how hard can I hit the brakes to not surprise the tire. And then once the tire is actually gripped up under deceleration, you could probably add a little bit of pressure to get the car stopping a little bit harder, because you're not surprising the tire anymore. It's already doing what it's doing with deceleration. But if you're not one of those people that has it cut out for you a little bit harder without ABS, if you have ABS, you should just be whacking the pedal.
Okay. I find, for whatever reason in this car, in the new car, that I can feel it better, even though it's less manual than the other car was. So, but I get that feedback when I'm on it a little too hard, right? So I feel the pedal dance a little, and then I know to just give it a little less pressure and then ride the Mew into the brake zone, essentially. Like leave it there and then come back off a little, right? So I'm not on ABS, and then sort of ride that into the brake zone and start releasing. So.
And what's interesting about that is you hear this talked about with downforce cars sometimes. As you're driving a downforce car at its maximum speed towards a corner, it's also making its maximum downforce, which means it has its most grip. And you hit the brakes, but you have to account for losing downforce through the entire braking zone as you slow the car down. Well, not necessarily only for downforce cars. That's actually true for all cars. You don't have the assistance of all that air travel and the intensity of the speed to help slow the car down at 40 miles an hour like you do at 120. So, ironically enough, a good braking trace looks like hitting peak pressure immediately, like almost a vertical line to the maximum amount of brake pressure. But then it sort of trails off through the entire brake zone in a pretty linear fashion with the speed going away. So you can basically think of it like you said, it tickle the ABS for a moment and then pull back, but then you can almost continue to pull back almost the entire braking zone to match the speed coming off the car so that it's, again, settling in and it's at its most composed when you want to start to turn the car and change direction. And I think that's what people make mistakes about is they think it's the same brake zone or the same brake pressure for the entire zone. And then as soon as I want to turn the car, the brakes come off. So it's like a yes and no question rather than a how much question through the entire zone.
Yeah. I think we were sort of taught that during the HPD process. They try to tell you that it's not an on-off switch, but they always try to get you pointed straight, brake hard, release, heads up, turn in, that kind of thing. And in those big braking moments, I think it's something that I switch to, right? I don't know why I don't do it coming off the back straightaway. Probably because you can't, like you said, you can't do it coming off the back straightaway at VIR. It just doesn't work. The track is moving, so you have to move too. But, yeah. So I've done a lot of playing with which corners do I shrink my braking zones, trying to compress them. And then which ones am I trying to shift? So the braking distance is the same, but trying to push them a little deeper. So if I go 2 car lengths deeper, that just means I'm dragging brake a little more as I turn in for, say, 2 more car lengths. But
yeah, that's I like those words for it, but I've never actually heard the words. So you're saying to brake for a shorter distance or to get your braking done essentially over a different set of the distance is the same, but it's at a different time, right?
Right. So
that's what you're saying?
Yeah. So it just theoretically, let's say we're rolling down into turn 1 somewhere and we're braking at the 4 marker and we're releasing at the 1 marker. I can choose through data and butt dyno and experimentation to go, well, maybe I can go to 3 3/4 and see what that does. Or I can go to 3 3/4 down to 1. Or I can go instead to 3 3/4, but then drag my brake past the 1. So either shrink the zone or shifting the zone to try to pick up time. Now, I've been on tracks where shifting and compressing the zone doesn't help me. The car will physically do it, so I will brake later, right? I will brake a half a marker later, which in the data for me should be almost a full second of time. But what happens is on release, if I release at the normal spot, the car is going to be so upset that it will lose time between that portion and mid corner, and I'm not able to do it. I'm not able to gain time.
Sure. I think what dictates that is just the radius of the corner. So there's an ideal line, and that is essentially just a radius. And the wider the radius, the longer it's going to take you to come off the brakes, and the longer you're spending in the corner. So to put it into specifics, like turn 1 at VIR, it's a very tight radius. So the time that you spend going from brake to turn is very short.
Right.
So generally you don't think of what you're calling shifting the braking zone. You don't think of shifting the braking zone. You think of shrinking it as much as possible. I want to brake as late as I possibly can, because I generally have a super short window to come off the brake pedal, and it's not going to make that big of a difference. Versus a corner with a really wide radius like South Bend is the complete opposite. Most of the time you're shifting where the brakes are happening so that you can maintain as much speed as possible, because the radius of that corner is very, very shallow. So it's a really cool question. I've never actually had anyone ask before, when to know how to just brake later and try to get the car stopped as quickly as possible, versus how do I know maybe I brake at the exact same time, but you're releasing the pedal sooner is essentially all you're doing when you're shifting that brake zone. You're not physically capable of braking any later, or else you're going to botch the corner. You don't want to come in with any more like drama, because to your point, you're going to come off the brake and the car is going to be upset. So you have kind of a fixed brake point that you can't brake any later. What you're trying to do is pull off the brake as smoothly and as early as possible to maintain momentum, so that you can carry that nice wide apex. And to answer your question, I think it's pretty much down to the radius of the corner, and then maybe some fine details of balance of the car, elevation, that kind of thing.
Okay. So say I'm terrible at braking.
I won't.
Well, I mean, I've been getting better. The comfort of ABS really allows me to practice a lot of different things. The one thing that it kills me, but I put a new brake package on the car. It was done in a developmental capacity. In the first track day that I was out with it, it was the second session, and a bridge line on my AP calipers breaks going into turn 1 at Summit Point, and I still made the corner with a broken bridge line, losing all sorts of pressure. And I am super gun shy going into that corner. And I know the data says I can compress that braking zone a ton, but I physically, mentally, I can't. I could physically do it. I know I could do it. But my brain is like, nope, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. What kind of techniques or approaches can I apply to try, not just in that case, but in general, what type of practices should we be doing to shrink our brake zones?
That's a tough one to answer when there's like a fear involved, like this happened, I had a total brake failure, I had this, that, or the other happen, and therefore I'm scared. Right. That's almost a completely different answer that we can go to. But in a normal situation, let's talk about a newer driver, a new track for a driver. How do I know when I can brake later? It's all about references, and it's all about consistency on the pedal. So the first question is it a hard, medium, or soft brake zone? Usually it's either hard or soft. So let's say it's a hard brake zone. You're going to actually have to be on the brakes at peak pressure for a period of time. So the key with that is becoming consistent enough with your brake input at the pedal that you get essentially the same thing out of the car every time. If you're not yet maximizing the brake pressure, you're not consistent on your brake pressure, then you have more work to do before we really can answer this question. But the key with that first is becoming aware enough of how you're braking that you're basically getting to that, let's call it ABS or lockup, like that threshold brake every single time, the same way every time. Then it's a simple equation of how much time it takes to slow the car down. So let's say there's 5 brake markers to work with. You brake at the 5th one and you get to the 2 and you're going way too slow. So 5 minus 2 is 3. I should theoretically be able to brake at the 3 without completely wiping out.
Right.
So I'm going to try maybe the 4 the next time and then the 3 like real quick. That should be a pretty easy like dial that towards the brake, towards the corner, very quickly. Then beyond that, it's a very fine tuning. Maybe hit the brake press, the brakes at the same spot and work on pulling off them a little bit earlier as you get into the corner, or you're just kind of making these tiny little tweaks. Once you figured out, okay, I can brake at the 5 or I can brake at the 3 every time and it's going to be fine. Now introducing the idea of being intimidated for a good reason because something has happened. You have a little bit of a PTSD at that spot. Or if you're so new that you're working on hitting that peak pressure without scaring the crap out of yourself, because going and doing that into a corner is really scary. I guess it's a little bit of a different answer for both, but I say for newer drivers, I challenge them to go down a straightaway, make sure there's literally nobody behind them anywhere close, and then work on threshold braking, or do it on the street even. Like these are things you can do not being on a racetrack. I don't know that I have great tips on how to get over being scared of it, other than you really have to like decide. I always check the brake pedal with my left foot, and then decide like, okay, I'm going to go brake where I'm comfortable. And then I'm going to push it past that just incrementally every single time. And the last thing I'll say on that is I see this happen a lot with newer drivers or less experienced drivers overall, less confident, let's say, drivers overall. When they spook themselves, they revert back. Mm-hmm. So let's say you can brake at the you can brake at the 5, you can brake at the 4. Now I'm going to try the 3, and you brake at the 3 and you make the corner, but it's not pretty, and you're a little scared. They revert back to the 4 immediately. When maybe if you gave it another shot at the 3, you could actually be a little bit better with your inputs and make the car work for you, instead of have the same thing happen twice. If the same thing happens twice, then it's just not going to work. Do you get what I'm saying? Like you can't necessarily nail it the first try, but if someone tries it the first time and it doesn't go well, they revert back to something that's just slower.
Right.
And they never actually give themselves the chance to find that breakthrough.
Yeah. And I think that's where I'm guilty, right? It's every time I go into turn 1, specifically at Summit Point, not so much at VIR anymore. I think I broke my VIR issue. I was doing a lot of close racing with a buddy of mine, and we were nose to tail, and we were pushing each other in the brake zones. We know that we can go really, really deep. I should be able to go probably deeper at Summit Point than I can at VIR, but I won't. But every single lap, I'm like, I get to the 1 marker and I'm like, I'm so slow right now. I shouldn't be accelerating fully at this point. I should be rolling in, except for right now I'm so slow. I need to mash the gas every time. So
do you know where you brake when you're feeling that uncomfortable, or are you feeling uncomfortable and at the expense of that, you just don't even know where you're braking? You're just braking when you get scared.
No. So I'm braking at the 4 marker, which is totally unacceptable for my car. It should be probably the 3 marker, and I'd be happy with the 3.5. But it just, like, the math said, like you said, okay, so we brake, we do the math, shift it forward. I should be able to hit the 3 every single time, right? Very minimal trail in, and then roll into the throttle and be gone, right? But I get to the 4 marker, and this car is going really fast, and it's coming at the little access wall and a gravel trap with some tires. Like, that's all I look at. It's probably the worst thing for me to admit to, but that's what I'm looking at.
No, I completely understand the feeling. It's a really hard thing to advise on, because at the end of the day, I think it is one of those things that kind of comes down to just go do it. But that's not a good answer. That's like the worst thing to say. So, but I can remember, and I tell this story all the time, of the first time my first road race car, again, home track, Mid-Ohio, was like an 80 horsepower Civic on Hoosiers. It was a improved Touring C car. So like slower than TT6, slower than B-Spec. It's like the slowest car. That car was flat through turn 1 at Mid-Ohio. Mm-hmm. And everybody around me who had been exposed to that type of car, that class, I had some friends who had owned the exact same car earlier. They're like, it's flat through turn one. It's flat through turn one. But if you know driving down the straight into a corner that you can't see the exit of, that you're used to braking in other cars on, and it's just like, I have to do it flat, was so scary. But I knew I was supposed to do it flat. I had all my friends with good data telling me to do it. So I remember doing all of the practice session with lifting or braking, getting to qualifying, doing the first lap with a little bit of brake, the second lap with just a lift, and the third lap, it was like, I'm going to go flat. And I'll figure it out if it starts to go wrong. But I plan my out. I planned, like, if I need to, like, get on both feet in, I know where I'm going to go. I'm not going to ride it out too long, but I'm just going to turn in flat. And I did the first time I went through, and it was not that great. It was like a little notchy because it was a scared driver just being like,
right.
But I made it. And it was like the fear of going flat through the turn in was gone. Now I knew I didn't do the corner perfectly, so I had to keep doing it. But then every single time I did it after that, it became easier and easier and easier because I was over the fear of essentially turning in without lifting. And then, 2 laps, 3 laps later, it was like, oh my God, what was I even scared of? This is literally so brainless that my mom could do it if I told her to just go turn the wheel. So that's why I say, like, I can appreciate that fear and that, like, thought as you drive down the entire straightaway, thinking nothing but the thing that you don't want to do, which is brake later, cause an accident, whatever. And to that, I always just advise, like, the fear is absolutely a valid feeling, but if you have all this data supporting the idea that it's unfounded, find a way to make yourself comfortable with the circumstances. Kind of rambling, but basically what I would advise for you is, like, don't be too committed to the corner, be committed to the brake point. And if something's not comfortable by the time you get to the corner, you just go straight off into that little access road, turn it around, or, like, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. It doesn't have to be perfect when you get to the corner. What you have to work on is getting yourself over the idea that you're uncomfortable braking where the car can brake.
Yeah. It's going to take repetition. And for me, consistency, getting into that consistency, of my brake pressure there instead of just freaking out and jumping on it. I understand that part, and I need to do it on not race weekends. I think that's going to be the biggest key for me, because during a race weekend, there's nothing but a bunch of people in front of me, Sure. And I don't want to, that's not where I should be testing things, right? It's not where I should be pushing myself. Unfortunately, test days, there's usually something even more expensive in front of me these days, like a McLaren or something, and I'm like, oh, I'm not testing it right now, so we don't always get the right opportunities, but I need to get myself in the headspace to, when I have the opportunity, to go ahead and try to push it. Like you said, at some point, what's the worst thing that's going to happen is I roll through the access road and I end up on Jefferson, assuming the drifters aren't there, nothing's going to happen. Right. So.
Yeah, it's just trying to get over that the one thing that you're scared of is the distance between the 4 and the 3 at your top speed. You're not scared of the corner or anything else. Right. So if you can get yourself through that little bit. Let me ask, are you musical at all? Did you ever play any musical instruments or anything like that?
I couldn't hold a tune to save my life. No.
Okay. I've had some interesting conversations with people who are musical about the way they can kind of turn a braking zone or the distance in a track into a rhythm.
Okay.
If you say you have 4 brake markers to work with, they're like kind of the beats on a measure. And that's a good way for some people whose brain works that way to, like, count the time between brake marker 5 and 4. And, like, maybe don't just go from the 4 to the 3.
Right.
The first try, but you can find a way to, like, divide up into at least quarters or thirds, so that you just, let's say you go to the 4 1/4 3 laps in a row, and then 4 1/2 or 3 1/2 3 laps in a row, and then 3 1/4 3 laps in a row, and you just kind of work your way in.
Yeah, do that.
I'm musical, so my brain worked that way.
Yeah, I want to do the steps. I want to step myself into it. I definitely don't want to just go, well, there are 3 markers. The math says 3. Like,
Yeah. No.
But
I would push yourself to get, like a full session in at the 3.5.
mm-hmm.
And like if you find halfway through the session, you're like, all right, this is actually pretty fine, then you can push it. But like maybe part of the issue is you're getting yourself caught up in the idea that, you need to get a full board deeper and give yourself the chance to go like a quarter of a board deeper for 4 sessions in a row.
Yeah. I'm probably going to work a quarter board at a time because
yeah.
And that's when I end up jumping on the ABS and, it not being consistent. Right. So,
right.
I think that's the biggest key when we start working on braking, like you said earlier, is be consistent with that pedal pressure, because if you're not, you cannot go into the panic mode. That will incite the panic mode, and it gets worse when you have lockup. It gets worse when you're on the ABS all the time. Like if you ride the ABS in, it doesn't stop as well as you being just off the ABS. So right. Well, at least my car doesn't. Maybe other cars do, maybe with the fancy BMW reprogrammed race joint. I don't know, but my car doesn't. It stops pretty decent, but it doesn't stop the best, and you need to be at the best, right? So anyway.
Yeah, totally. And not only is it the consistency on the brake application, so when you hit the pedal, that's very important, but the harder part, the thing that actually makes people really fast is the brake release.
Right.
Which we haven't really talked about a whole lot yet, but remembering at least the most basic rule that if you want to turn the wheel, you have to start releasing the brake pressure, which is equivalent to if you want to turn the wheel and make a corner, you have to take the weight off the nose of the car and let it settle to the outside of the car. But kind of using those two very basic with a lot of nuanced rules of I have to hit my peak pressure when I hit the pedal, and I have to come off or start to come off the brakes when I want to turn the wheel. You should be able to dial in the braking distance and zone that you have pretty quickly at any new track once you're familiar enough with the car. And obviously I don't expect like a novice or a newer driver to do that their first day. But drivers like us generally can get there much quicker with that, knowing those basic rules.
Yeah.
That have, a lot going on more than that, but if you just boil it down to that, it's pretty spot on.
Well, let's get into the brake release, because when I talk about shifting the brake zone, the key becomes your brake release, right? So if you go from the 4, if you're braking from the 4 to the 1, and then you're turning in, if you move that to the 3.5 and you start trailing through, the release isn't the same, right? So it's much slower on the release when you start dragging at least to me, when you start dragging your braking deeper and further.
Yep.
So instead of when you're consistent, you can get away with a lot of abrupt off the board. But when you start shifting your brake zone, the release is key. So do you have any techniques to practice brake release?
Yeah, driving on the street.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that there are things you can do on the street to enforce good habits on the racetrack that have nothing to do with putting the car anywhere close to the limit of like grip. So I'm not saying go be dangerous on the street.
Right.
I'm saying there are certain things that you need to be doing as an absolute baseline function in a car all the time, whether you're on the street or on the track. And if you're doing these things, you will be constantly working towards like being just always in that routine on the track. So the first one is vision. You need to be looking where you want to go at all times. I try obviously super hard to, like, when you're on a big cloverleaf roundabout, you need to be looking like basically through your like side window to look as far through those as you can. So that's like my one thing that I always say. And then the other one is you should always be essentially hitting your peak brake pressure the moment you go to the brake pedal, and then releasing the brakes through the entire time that you're stopping the car. And it's really hard to get people to break that habit because in driver's school, meaning literally driver's ed,
right,
you're taught to, okay, I see that red light way up there, a quarter mile. I'm going to slowly lift off the brake, off the throttle. I'm going to rest my foot on the brake. And then I'm going to slowly start to stop the car through the entire distance over this next quarter mile, where I hit peak pressure right before the car stops. And then the car just kind of like, right? Or if you're a good street driver, you can release the brake with the car stopping so the car doesn't jolt when you stop.
Right.
And that's all based in passenger comfort and like safety to give yourself plenty of time all the way up there. I believe that if you are working on performance driving, you need to break yourself of that habit, work towards some version of a, let's call it threshold brake on the street, meaning you see that red light, you know how fast you're going. When you need to brake, you hit the brake, let's call it 0.3 G, just a little bit harder than you would normally hit the brake at the start. Use that first moment to start the car a little bit more efficiently, and then work on rolling off the brake all the way to the point that the car stops. So you're using the distance from the time you need to come to a stop and where you are way more effectively to what you looks like on a racetrack.
Right.
And I know for a fact that I do this, and I have since I started driving a car. I don't know why, other than I played a lot of video games before that, and that's just kind of what I do for braking. That's the best I can say. But I always tell people if they can work on that technique in the car, because it's way harder to do at low speed. The same way that heel toe shifting is way harder to do at lower speed. If you can start to get those types of inputs, again, nowhere near the limit of adhesion, or you're not pushing the car, driving like a race car driver. But if you can get your brain in those kind of muscle memory functions, then you're going to be way better off when you get to the racetrack, because you're not switching your style of braking. You're just braking harder when you actually need to.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely work on brake release, especially when I'm driving my truck. Just a sort of, it's not like a coast in type of thing, but you don't, when I'm trailered up, I don't need to be, slamming the trailer around and the car on it and stuff. So you're always trying to be gentle on the release. The same thing when we talk about left foot braking. I just don't tell my wife I'm practicing left foot braking while we're running around on the street.
Sure.
I don't want her freaking out. But again, we're not doing it in an emergency situation, but just when you need to graze it, just to get that sort of teach that leg, that foot, that ankle to sort of move a little differently than it's used to. So,
yep. And as a bonus, if she doesn't notice, that means you're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah. And when she does notice, you hosed it.
If she notices, you're like, okay, I got to work on that a little better.
Oh, no. Yeah. I've definitely scared the crap out of her a couple times, but it's fine. Whatever. It was a while ago. So
I was actually doing that in a rental minivan. I was working somewhere with a group of people that I only know as coworkers in the car. I was like, I'm going to see if I can left foot brake and see if none of them notice. And I thought I was getting away with it. And I asked somebody, it's like, do you notice the brakes feel smooth? And they're like, they feel a little touchy. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
Nope. Okay. I need to be a little better then.
Yeah. Touchy brakes are a whole nother subject. They're all personal on how people drive. I have a Toyota pickup truck and I drive Hondas, so I'm used to spongy brakes. And I got behind the wheel of my buddy's Bullet Mustang, and those brakes were super touchy. So very.
Yeah, I think that's where I always kind of going back to the like, how do you recommend someone to get more comfortable? I always test the brakes. To be honest, I basically do it in pit lane, like when I get released from grid. To like, obviously, I'm in a different car a lot more often than most people are. Most people have their own car, right? But I use an opportunity like that. Or actually, let's use autocross as an example. Autocross, you can use the time from the grid to the start line to be somewhat effective. And one of those is like, what do the brakes feel like? So that when I get to the first turn of the autocross course, I'm not surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's see. How do you think, we sort of touched on it, but how do you think we as drivers, those who are like, let's not say scared, timid about things, how can we build our confidence? So we talked about operating it on the street. Are there anything else you think we can do to work on our confidence?
I guess, can you describe the confidence? Are we talking just broad confidence? Are we talking like being nervous on the track, or are we talking a specific part of
just confidence in general when we're approaching trying to make any adjustments to our braking?
Sure. I mean, the first thing is reference points. You have to understand, you have to have a knowledge of where you have been doing things in order to make scientific changes or appropriate changes. You should, in general, you should always have a break point. And I should be able to ask you in paddock and you basically know where it is. Like if we were just on track within the last hour, you should basically have that ready to go.
Can I add that should not just be the board?
No, it should almost never be the board unless the board is attached to a fence or something where no one can hit it.
Yeah.
But reference points are absolutely everything for a driver that is not aware of where they've been doing inputs on the car. There is physically no way for them to make a change and understand fully what the effect of that was.
Okay.
So, when I was working track days, I was the novice coach for a group of people that were, in theory, very new or had never been on a racetrack before. We didn't do an instructor. It was like an experience thing. So we would send, this was SCCA Track Night in America. They don't do instructors or anything. It's like one, call it camp counselor. And I'm giving a driver's meeting to equip them with the information to be safe. And then I'm supervising them to hold them accountable. That was my job. And I didn't tell them I never said anything about going fast. I never said anything about the line, about how to drive the car, other than when you go on the racetrack the very first time, which are parade laps, take note of as much of the scenery as possible. Don't worry where the car is. Think about there's brake markers for this corner. There's flag stands here. I need to look in make sure that you're in a fishbowl rather than a tunnel. And then when you're on the track for basically your entire first day, let's say, but this first session, you need to be paying attention to the time at which you do all of the inputs. So for example, coming down the front straight, if you choose or you think I need to start braking for this corner now, pay attention to where that was. If it was the start finish line, pay attention to that. If it was the 5 board, pick something around you based on where your instincts told you to start, and then use that point to make every single change from after that. So that's how you end up with a simple math equation of, okay, I broke at the 5 and I was parked by the 2. So now I know I can do 5 minus 2 equals 3. That's something I can do in a lap. Like I can be at the limit of that in a lap because I understand that. A new driver, obviously I wouldn't expect them or ask them to or anything like that, but I would expect the new driver to at least know where they took their foot off the throttle and started to hit the brake because their instincts told them to. And then now you're just doing a science experiment for the rest of the day. Push it a little bit and a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And if at any point when you're starting to push, you feel uncomfortable, you start to scare yourself, you start to feel intimidated, something tells you like that was less comfortable than I was last time. But everything was still fine. You just noticed you're less comfortable. Stick with that spot for a couple times. Try to push through that discomfort.
Right.
And maybe you'll find yourself all of a sudden like I'm not stagnated at this 4 board because now I've tried the 3.5 3 times instead of once when I got scared the one time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I do bring up the boards and not being your reference point because we totally took a green flag. Everybody's grouped up. We flew through turn 1, no big deal. And we came around at Summit Point, turn 10 for lap number 2. And there was a 6 board and an arrow and nothing else was left.
And a void of mystery.
Yes, it was definitely.
I was at CMP this weekend for the Southeast region race, and there was some incident between some spec Miatas where they all spun off on the right after the kink. So they took out everything but the 4 board, I believe. Which, if you know CMP, coming through the kink and then you're immediately on the brakes for that hard left at turn 11. All of a sudden, there were no brake markers, and for the next 2 laps, you could see people going off they were completely at a total loss for where to brake. Because the boards were gone. So that's an excellent thing to bring up. Focus on the texture in the track, coloration changes at the pavement, curbing, trees around you, access roads, flag stands, like literally anything but what could get hit. The one that drives me even crazier, other than brake markers, are pretty bad, but cones. Oh my God. Do not ever pick a cone as your reference point ever.
No, never. They definitely move. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And I probably hit them because I'm not.
Taking out people's reference points, huh, Tom?
Yeah. So I have a funny story about that, about CMP. We went to CMP 2 years ago on the One Lap of America, which is basically you drive a different track every single day, and you have to do a time attack on every single track for an entire week with the same car. So we go to CMP, and we had gone to CMP to practice. I was in a Corvette, and I knew my brake marker was the 4. So I show up, I've got notes, I've watched my video back. Like I know when we get to CMP, I don't get any practice. I have to go, and I know my brake marker is the 4. Well, we're allowed to walk the track the morning of, so we're walking the track, and I get to that same spot right after the kink, and all the boards are gone because something had happened over the previous weekend. It was a Monday; they hadn't got them set back up yet. But I knew I needed to brake at the 4, and I noticed there's debris of the boards all over the grass. So I go out, pick up a piece of debris. I walk around, and I find where the 4 board used to be in the ground, and I stuck the debris right where the 4 board was. So now I have my own brake marker. And at least I will have a break point for myself because I know where I need to stop. That's a very unique kind of format for that, though.
Yeah. I almost wanted to go down and like paint an orange line, where they need to be on the track, but I'm sure they would get pretty upset with me for running around with spray paint. But anyway,
or they wouldn't notice.
Hope probably not.
Although now they could, yeah.
Now they'll know, but anyway.
Now they will. That's the bad part about a podcast. You can't get away with anything.
Oh, I'm not that popular. It's fine. Any more tips or tricks for braking you think we need to cover?
I still feel like there's always more to talk about with brake release.
Okay.
And I mean, obviously the cardinal sin is treating the brake release like a light switch. In general, when you hit the brake pedal, you want it to be a light switch. It needs to be a digital, like 0 brake to full brake almost all the time. The peak pressure that you hit is obviously different, but when you hit the brake pedal, hit the brake pedal. The hardest part is not just staying on the brakes until you turn and then popping off the pedal. That's the worst thing you can do for the car because you're changing the weight balance so fast that the car can't keep up with it. So if you can work on, again, even if you have to start on the street, work on your fidelity with your right or left foot, whichever it may be, to try to release the brake pressure off the pedal in a perfectly linear fashion. It's basically like slipping the clutch. When you're learning to drive a manual, you have to develop that fidelity with your left leg to like release the clutch smoothly, and you suck at it for your first day, and then by day 3, it's totally fine. It's the same thing. You have to have that fidelity in the pedal to not be approaching a corner at 90 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, and then like, oh, I'm fine, and release the pedal. The car just can't keep up with that sort of input. So you have to develop that muscle memory over time to slowly follow the brake release with the dissipation of speed so that when you start to turn, you've already started releasing the brake pedal a little bit, and you can roll that weight from the nose around the outside of the car to the outside tires rather than just like, okay, I'm done braking, I turn now. And that mistake is made all the time. So I don't know that I can describe it better with the audio form podcast, but try to be constantly aware. How quickly am I releasing the brake pedal? Is it too quick? Can I slow that motion down? Can I start to release the brake pedal sooner? Can I keep my momentum up and actually make the car happier by braking less towards the turn-in point than your mind might say, I need to keep braking until I want to turn as hard as possible.
Yeah.
If that made sense.
No, it makes sense to me, but I think one thing I may have missed is explaining mu to people who don't understand. So we're jumping on the brakes. That's the instant, threshold pressure. But what's happening is, if you go back to the thermodynamics episode I had, you're building heat, and the heat in your braking system is actually helping you grab stuff. It wants to be at an optimal temperature. Now you can exceed that temperature, sure, but generally speaking, we're not boiling over every corner. What we're actually doing is bringing it into an optimal grab. And the further you're holding that pressure, you actually need to start slowly releasing it because it'll start to grab more and more and more and more. So you hit your optimal pressure, and as you get through the braking zone, you need to start slowly releasing it anyway, because your brakes are going to be working better than they were working when you initially touched the pedal. So
Yep. That's a way better way to describe what I tried to describe with the downforce analogy, right? As the slower you go, you need to start to pull away sooner than you think most often.
Yes.
More often than not.
Yeah. More often than not, you're not trying to ride that initial pressure all the way down. You have to start slowly releasing. And that's just going to be a trick that you work on. It's going to suck because if you change pads, you may really change things, So some pads don't react that well to being let go of. And then other pads, you may not even notice a difference, but it'd be something to be aware of if you change pads. So, all right, Tom. Well, I think that'll cover it for brakes this time around. I appreciate you coming on the show again.
Yeah, totally. I hope that helps. If anybody's, like I said, this is the thing that takes a great driver and makes them the best. It's the thing that takes a good driver and makes them great. It's the absolute hardest thing to do. It's hard enough to talk about. It's even harder to do. So hopefully there's a little light bulb or a little nugget in there that whoever's listening, they'll pick up on something to try. Including you. Hopefully you get to the 3.
Yeah, hopefully.
Let me know how it goes.
We'll see. Tom, are you still taking coaching clients for this year?
This year is still a little tricky. I haven't been able to share what I'm doing yet, but I have most of my weekends preoccupied. So what I can share is I'm going to be doing a lot of coaching or offering my coaching through Blaze, which is a coaching service, kind of coach database, but you do a majority of the work by uploading your video. You send it off to the coach that you choose. They review your video and you get a review back via a video review back in the next 2 days or so. So I'll be doing that for sure. If you have events you're planning on, you can go to Blaze and find my profile. You can sign up and basically you're just submitting your videos to me to get videos analysis back.
Okay.
But I'll be coaching trackside a little bit less this year, and it's for a good reason. That's
okay.
all I say so far.
That's it. I mean, we can't let all the cats out of the bag, right? So
I want to. I haven't even shared it on my podcast yet, so I can't give you the exclusive. I'm sorry.
Lizard brains for those who don't know. So,
yep.
I appreciate it again, sir.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Good to talk to you.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.